Okay, welcome everybody. I'm glad to be here on the GMAT Club YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe to be notified about the new GMAT and MBA videos. There is a special offer as part of this session. If you subscribe, you will get a 7-day subscription to the GMAT Club tests. Activation is instant, so look for a link in the comments. So to get started, I am going to share my screen and put up my slides. And so today's topic is 5 things you need to get into your top choice MBA program. My name is Joe Farr, and I am a Veritas Prep admissions consultant working with GMAT Club for this presentation. And so just as a reminder, if you like what you're hearing throughout the course of this video, please be sure to put a like on the video. And I will be answering questions at the end. So if you have questions during the slide presentation, feel free to jot those down. And at the end, I will answer during the chat process. So just to give you a little bit of information about myself, I got a bachelor's in economics from Duke University and a minor in chemistry. Like most people who went to Duke, I started off as a pre-med student, but because of my fortune of being a manager for the men's basketball team all 4 years, I found my way into sports and entertainment. And so after I graduated from Duke, I interned at the Atlantic Coast Conference and then made my way to ESPN, where I worked in programming for 4 years. And once I realized I wanted to start my own business and do my own creative pursuits, that's when I decided to get an MBA, which I got from the Yale School of Management in Marketing and Leadership. And I was an admissions interviewer and student ambassador during my second year. I founded Trey Mojo Productions after graduating SOM, and I've been in admissions consulting with Veritas Prep for over 10 years. So all of this experience is part of what I'm using to help give you insight into the process of applying to school. So just one quick housekeeping note. At Veritas Prep, we are offering free MBA admissions phone consultation, which you can access through this link, which we will also provide in comments. So again, the topic of today's discussion is 5 things you need to get into your MBA program. Number 1, as you might suspect, would be high GMAT or GRE score. Number 2 would be a high undergraduate GPA, and you would need a strong career achievement as well as plans for the future. You would need great recommendations from your superiors or peers and deep research into the schools. So we will talk about each of these piece by piece, starting with a high GMAT or GRE score. Now, just to start the topic, I'll show you what the average GMAT scores are for the top programs. They range from 684 at Emory all the way up to 734 at Stanford. So obviously that's pretty high, a low 680 rather, to the low 730s. That's kind of the range for the average scores. Now we'll talk in a couple of slides as to how much you should pay attention to averages versus other metrics. But these are the cold hard facts about your top programs. Now, obviously, these days, top MBA programs are also accepting GRE scores. So I'm providing the average GRE scores for top programs. And just because it's still relatively new that programs are utilizing GRE scores, you'll notice that some of these higher averages do not necessarily correspond to top programs like Rochester, Rutgers, Georgetown. These are well-ranked schools, but not your top 15 or 20. But as usual, Stanford is still at the top of average GRE scores with a 330, and we work our way down to Indiana with an average of 315 for the 2018 class. And you can see the trends over the last 3 years for average GRE scores. So with that in mind, what are the actual targets for a GMAT or GRE? What is a good enough score to get into business school? And as perhaps should be obvious, but isn't always apparent to applicants, it really does depend on where you're applying. If we're looking at GMAT scores, 19 of US-based programs in 2018 had GMAT averages over 700. We just saw some of the 2019 scores. There were only 18 schools that had averages above 700. Almost all of those are top 20 schools. And in 2019, Stanford had the highest score at 734. But the average score for these schools is not your target score. That's a mistake that a lot of applicants make. You really want to shoot for the middle 80% range. And the reason is obviously for a certain score like at Stanford, for 734 to be Stanford's average, it means roughly half of their applicants got above a 734, but another half got below a 734. And so we're really looking for where most of their admitted students got in. And that's where this middle 80% range comes from. And so for most of the top programs, GMAT scores start to be viable at about 680%, depending on the school. GRE scores are accepted with no prejudice against the test. You still want to shoot for the middle 80%, but not all schools are fully reporting the GRE statistics, so you won't be able to see that for everybody. But there are tools like a GRE to GMAT converter that you can utilize to kind of get a sense for where you stand compared to the rest of the student body. If your GPA is low, and we'll talk about GPA in a minute, then that will need to be balanced with a higher GMAT or GRE. So even though you're shooting for middle 80%, you have to shoot for higher within that range to mitigate a low GPA. So now we're going to talk about number two, high undergraduate GPA. And again, I'm going to start by showing you the statistics for average GPA. Rice obviously had a 3.41, but the lowest in the top schools was really Emory at 3.3, and it works our way up to HBS and Stanford with average GPAs of 3.7. So obviously, again, you still have to have generally performed well in undergrad in order to be considered at these top programs. But you still want to shoot for the middle 80%. That's still the way to measure yourself against the student body based on the past couple of years of statistics. You also want to balance academic achievement with extracurricular activities. AdComs prefer a well-engaged student with a 3.6 or even below, maybe even down to a 3.4 or lower, if it's someone who is fully engaged in extracurricular activities versus an applicant who had a 4.0 but literally just lived in the library and did nothing else. If all you're doing is academics, it doesn't really show breadth or depth of engagement. And for business schools, we're really looking for people who are fully well-rounded. If you are somebody who are already had completed undergrad, obviously that's what most of you are facing, then you can't affect your GPA. So these pieces of information, I guess, are more relevant to undergrads who are thinking about applying. But one way you can help to mitigate things if you've already completed college and you did not participate in extracurricular activities would be to start participating now. So any kind of activities that you're passionate about, doesn't have to be through your work. It could be coaching the local basketball team or doing service-oriented work. Anything that you can get involved in in a meaningful way will help to allay any concerns about your lack of involvement during school, especially since that means you will be balancing extracurricular activities now with a full workload in your career. Many of the reported average GPAs for top business schools are based on U.S. undergraduate averages based on a 4.0 scale. And admissions committees often convert international school GPAs to a US 4.0 scale. That does not mean that on applications you should be converting. Do not try to do the conversion yourself unless the application explicitly asks you to, and it's highly unlikely that the application will ask you to. And if a GMAT or GRE is low, this is the converse of a couple slides ago, that will need to be balanced with a higher GPA and potentially an even stronger career achievement and progression up to this point. And just as a reminder, please hit like or subscribe if you like what you are hearing so far. And again, I will be answering questions at the very end. So number 3, in terms of top 5 items you need to get into your top choice, is a strong career achievements and plans. So we touched on that briefly at the end of the last slide. But work experience is a big part of what they're looking at in terms of career progression. Most top MBA programs seek applicants with at least 1 to 2 years of work experience. On average, admitted students have about 4 to 5 years of work experience. Most students or most applicants also tend to be around 27, 28 years old at the time of matriculation, though programs do admit both older and younger applicants. I know I had classmates who were in their 40s when I was in school. And of course, you have programs like the HBS 2+2, Yale Silver Scholars, or Stanford MBA Deferred Enrollment Program, where applicants are coming in straight from undergrad. And these programs will provide work experience as part of the studies. The reason why work experience is so important to admissions committees is because MBA programs are very group oriented and class discussion oriented. And so they want people who can come in with experience about the topics that will be discussed, so that you're not just coming in based on theory, but you are able to provide hands-on, front lines perspective on the class discussions, and especially for the case studies. So that's why work experience is important. But again, given these programs like HBS 2+2 and Yale Silver Scholars, if you have a stellar undergraduate degree, you are still in the running for going straight to business school from college. If you're someone with a shorter work experience, that puts more focus on your GPA and GMAT or GRE scores. The statistics become that much more important. But if you've had longer work experience, then that can help to mitigate any concerns that might come up from a lower GPA or GMAT or GRE. So it's all about balance. The admissions committee, they all really do look at you holistically. There's no one number or no one element that means more than another when they're looking at your candidacy. So don't think that there's always a specific number or years of work experience that you're trying to hit. But again, there's a balance, a yin and a yang to it. So keep that in mind as you decide when is the right time for you to apply. Next, we're talking about career progression. So the number of years of work experience is one thing, but admissions committees also look for applicants who have been promoted throughout their careers and have received increased responsibility. If you're at the same title after 3 years in the workforce and you haven't gotten any extra duties or responsibilities, then that's a red flag. So they're really looking for someone who has grown as part of their work experience. Leadership is obviously coveted in business schools, but the definition of leadership is not as narrow as many people believe. Most people think that serving as a formal manager, where you had staff reporting to you, is the epitome of leadership, but that is not the only path. So you want to think about projects you have led, whether it's a cross-departmental initiative that the company tasked you with, or a project within your own department, or anything like that where you had to kind of lay out goals, timetables, where you had to set the benchmarks and lead a group towards that. That would be considered leadership. Or even if you kind of, as people say, led from the bottom, meaning you had to get senior leadership or senior management on board with something, that also demonstrates leadership. So think about anything along those lines, kind of outside the box beyond the typical definition of leadership. Uh, as much as leadership is an important aspect to an applicant, MBA programs are collaborative, so you need to be able to show teamwork as well. Um, I'm sure that any research that you've done, you've seen the words collaboration and uh, community in all of the material for the schools. Uh, they generally do mean that, because you are working in groups on case studies. You're working towards projects together. They're trying to replicate the business model and what you will be doing in your careers. And so, as part of that, you need to show that you can play well with others. And AdComs also look to build diverse student bodies. That includes coming from varied industries. So, like in my case, I was coming from entertainment, which is not very common in the MBA programs. And so I was able to lean on that and show the growth and development in my career as I gained promotions and more duties and responsibilities from a non-traditional background, while still demonstrating the business acumen that would be needed in an MBA program. If you come from a common industry like accounting or consulting or something along those lines, then you can stand out by taking a unique approach to certain problems during your career. And so that helps to show your progression as well. In terms of grading your career progression, obviously your resume is going to be the most important part. This is the first step to building your personal brand and is oftentimes the first impression to who you are as an applicant and a person. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to build your resume in a way to show that you are the rock star that you are. So you want to do 1 page per decade that you've been in the workforce. For most applicants, probably 99% of all applicants, that means you need to stick to a 1 page resume, not a sentence more. You want to begin bullets with active verbs such as led, developed, or enacted. These are the types of words that show action, things that you have done during your career. And you focus the bullets that show your accomplishments, not just your daily duties. That's a mistake a lot of people make, is just demonstrating what they do on a day-to-day basis. You may have a couple of bullets here and there that talk about your day-to-day duties to explain what your job really is, but you want the majority of your bullets to show what you have gotten done. And another way to think of that is to demonstrate why the company is better off for you having been the person in that job instead of somebody else. And you want to quantify those accomplishments as much as possible. Examples include reducing costs by X%, increasing revenue by Y%, or increasing efficiency by Z%. Those are kind of the easy ones. Also, if you've dealt with large budgets, large staffs, those sorts of things help to really put into perspective just how big of a deal your accomplishments are. And you also want to place education at the bottom of your resume, unless you're a recent graduate. If you're somebody who's applying from undergrad or maybe a year or so out of undergrad, then you can start the resume with education. But most applicants, you want to put education at the bottom, just above your extracurriculars, but otherwise at the bottom. And you do naturally want to include your extracurriculars on your resume. For the extracurricular activities that you did while you were in school, that will be in the education section. For extracurriculars that you have done post-college, that will be a separate section that you will put underneath your education. And again, as a reminder, please hit like or subscribe if you are liking what you're hearing. And I will answer questions at the end. We just have a few slides left. So keep note of the things that you want to learn more about that aren't fully covered by the slides. So career goals are an important aspect of your career progression. So the goals that you have for after your MBA program. And the reason why goals are important is because admissions committees are looking to see how they can help you to succeed. And so your career goals need to be achievable and they need to make sense. So part of demonstrating your fit with these programs is knowing what you plan to do short and long-term post-MBA. Short-term means immediately after you graduate, and long-term means 5 to 10 years after graduating from the MBA program. Short-term goals can provide skills to reach your long-term goals. So you want to be able to draw those connections as you are completing your essays and applications and even in the interview process. Do not try to craft the career goals you think the AdCom wants to hear. They typically see through that. It comes through as hollow and not quite believable or persuasive. So your goals should be what you truly want. So you want to look introspectively and determine what is fulfilling for you. Conduct research so you can understand the industry and what is needed to reach these goals. And just one more note on the career goals. Some people will be career switchers. In that case, there won't necessarily be a connection between your future goals and your past career up to this point. So it's okay if there's a disconnect, but you still need to be able to draw a line to your passions and interests to the future and demonstrate how you've developed enough skills to at least make that career switch both relevant and achievable. If you're not making a career switch, then you should show how your pre-MBA career and the MBA and your future goals all fit. So that's a narrative through line that you should have. And so next, we're going to talk about strong recommendations. You need those to be able to get into your top choice. And so that means great letters of recommendation. Most there are 2 letters of recommendation, one of which will come from a current supervisor. Do not get letters from executives you don't know. That's a mistake that a lot of applicants make. They try to get those celebrity endorsements, so to speak, someone who looks great on paper because of their title, but admissions committees are bombarded by these and are not impressed. You do want to get letters from recommenders you know very well and who can write about your strengths, weaknesses, and true character. This will be someone you work with daily, and ideally an alumnus of the school or alumna of the school if you know that person well. Now, obviously, not everyone can go to their current supervisor. So that can show as a red flag if you do not explain it. But if telling your current supervisor can harm your standing, Then you want to approach an old boss who you worked closely with, significant clients who can speak to your work product, or a peer if and only if he or she has good standing in the company and can give great detail about your accomplishments and strengths. And so there will typically be an optional essay that you can complete as part of the application. That's where you want to explain why you're not getting a recommendation from a current supervisor. And typically that explanation is as simple as it will harm your standing in your job to go to your supervisor. And so you've gone to person X, who knows your work product well and has been a mentor or whatever relationship you've had. For those of you who maybe are a part of a family business, then typically you do not want to get a family member because that will not be as persuasive because, of course, a family member will typically speak well of you no matter what. So in those cases, you also want to go to maybe an old boss if you worked somewhere before the family business, or clients or business partners, that sort of thing. And just continuing on the topic of letters of recommendation, your recommenders are busy people, so you need to give them plenty of time. And you also need to give the recommenders direction. So give them each school's rules and timelines. Most schools will ask for an email address to provide the info directly to the recommender. And those emails will give them prompts as to exactly how to complete. Usually there's going to be like a checklist that they need to complete and certain prompts that they're answering. But a lot of times schools understand that because the recommenders are busy, they're going to try to do a form letter. That is fine as long as the form letter touches on each of the topics that each individual school is asking. And you also, of course, want to make sure that they are naming the proper school in each respective letter of recommendation. And you want to provide a packet to the recommenders, including a current draft of your resume, a list of examples you would include to show your strengths, maturity in dealing with adversity, and overall work product for the company. You want to take a stab at answering these as though you are the recommender so that you can provide this information, and it will help jog your recommender's memory on some of the topics that he or she may not have thought of on his or her own. You are not going to be writing the letters yourself. That is for the recommender, but you're just kind of helping to remind them of some of the topics that demonstrate, or projects or work product that demonstrate your strengths as a candidate. And you want to provide an explanation for your intended career path and desire for an MBA, and profiles of the schools that you would plan to apply to and why you think you're a fit. And again, for anyone who's just joining or missed this earlier, I will be answering questions at the end. So if you have any questions, take note, and I will answer those. Please hit like or subscribe if you like what you are hearing. So number 5, the last topic that you need in order to get into your top choice is deep research into the school that you're applying to. Now, I know that we're taking the approach as though you already know what your top choice is, but school selection really is important, and schools are more than their rankings. You don't want to pick schools just because they're highly ranked. Culture is also important. So look for the environment you will thrive most in. Will the programs have the proper resources available for you to accomplish goals? And as the number 5 subject heading said, you want to do your research. You should know the schools you are applying to inside and out, especially your top choice. You should know everything about this school. You can go to Veritas Prep annual reports, blogs and message boards like GMAT Club, who's hosting this talk. You want to go to student and professional ambassadors. The different websites for all the schools will have a section, usually when it's the leaders for the clubs. And there are also other places where They will provide email addresses or other contact information for current or recently former students who you can talk to get more information about things that maybe can't be found on the websites, things like culture and how students interact with each other, and things that you might do in the city that are outside of the program. This kind of information will help you to a learn that this is in fact the right school for you, and reinforce why this is a top pick for you, but it'll also help you to be able to communicate to the admissions committee why you're a fit. And campus visits are vastly important for that as well. Obviously, not everybody will be able to make a campus visit. That is not going to harm your chance. But if you have the flexibility to go to a campus and learn more and immerse yourself in the culture, that is only going to help your chances, because you'll be able to interact with students, professors, AdCom, but you'll also get a real feel for the environment in ways that just reading something on a screen cannot. And so, again, all of that leads to how you can communicate your story and your candidacy to the admissions committee. Part of that is the question that every school is going to ask is, why are you applying for an MBA? They're not looking for people who are just compiling advanced degrees. While the 2 years of business school can be used to determine what you want to do post MBA, you do need a clear path going in. And so you want to consider, as we kind of touched on earlier, are you looking to switch careers? Do you need the degree to move up within your own current career? Or do you have some big idea that only the MBA can help you enact? Once you have answers to those questions, you can provide that to the admissions committee and demonstrate why this particular school is uniquely suited to you. Because it's not just about an MBA in general, it's about an MBA at that school. And as I'm sure most of you listening know, each MBA program, while they all have fantastic programs across the board, whether you want to go into consulting, accounting, finance, marketing, et cetera, they many of them have certain strengths that other programs don't have, and certain focuses that others don't have. And so the more you can hone in on why you are seeking an MBA, the more you can really demonstrate why that particular school is the right one. And when you can do that, you've got a leg up on a lot of other candidates. Part of that is also explaining why now is the right time for your MBA. Applying for an MBA should be a timely decision. You need it now, or if you're kind of head to a year or two from now, you need to be able to say that that's when you need it and that you cannot wait. A lot of times, as demonstrated by trends in the industry, that to be able to capture what's going on, like a year or two ago, it might have been blockchain. To be able to really capture what's going on in blockchain, you need to jump in now while it's hot. Um, these days, there's a lot of social good focus, and there are different fintech companies that are entering the marketplace, and to be able to really take advantage of that and not being left behind, you need to get into the MBA now. Those are the types of ways you can communicate your message. It should not just be that you hate your current job and that you want to get out of it. That is not going to be very persuasive to the admissions committee, and it's going to make you look maybe a little flaky. And this also connects back to building your career goals. Do you have the skills needed to be successful with your goals? And if yes, determine the best timeline to be able to reach them. If no, determine what is needed in addition to your MBA so that you can build a plan to learn those skills. And so what we mean by that is, a lot of times why now is because you have progressed as far as you can in your particular field. And in order to be able to take the next step, you need an MBA. So that's how you would communicate things if you have, in fact, reached maybe a ceiling in your career at this point. And if you are a younger than average applicant, you will need to explain why you think you don't need any more experience, why you don't need to go into the workforce or stay in the workforce a little longer. So keep that in mind. Interviews are part of communicating to the admissions committee and part of the research process. So you should know that for most schools, interviews are blind. That means that the interviewer has only seen your resume. HBS is an exception to this, but a rare exception. If the interview is on campus, the interviewer will most likely be a second-year student, but could be an admissions committee member. If you can't make it to campus, interviews can also be done via Skype or with an alum in your area. Interview questions tend to start with an overview of your education and career. So you really need to be an expert on yourself. And that may sound obvious, but a lot of applicants cannot actually communicate why they've progressed in their career or education the way that they have, or why they made the particular choices that they made. And so you want to be able to communicate that and connect all of that back to the school that you're interviewing with. So again, it goes back to you need to have deep research into that school. Other important questions are why you're applying for an MBA, why that school, and why now. So 2 questions we just touched on. And of course, make sure that you dress appropriately. That means business formal for interviews. And so again, just to remind you, Veritas Prep is holding free admissions interview, free MBA admissions phone consultations using this link that I believe we've already put in comments as well. And so that is the presentation. And I will now answer questions. So, let's see here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. No questions as of the moment. How much role does schools' rank play in shortlisting the school to apply? So really, rankings are important in the sense that they show you exactly how hiring managers look at the programs, but you really should be paying more attention to culture and fit based on your goals. Maybe ranking can break a tie between 2 schools that seem fantastic for you and are the right fit in terms of culture and focus on certain academic programs. But to me, and I know not everyone thinks this way, but to me, rankings shouldn't play that much of a role in shortlisting unless you fully understand what it is you want to get out of the program. If it's more about giving yourself a leg up for hiring managers, or if it's about the alumni database that you want to tap into, ranking's going to mean more in that situation. If you're more focused on the education, then the ranking means a little bit less. So I hope I answered that question. So round 3 applications are due soon. Who do you think are better suited to apply in late application rounds? So I think in a late application, applicants who can stand out, particularly if you come from an underrepresented group, like women, or certain minorities, underrepresented minorities, or if you come from an industry that is not well represented in MBA circles, then you are very well suited for applying in round 3. One thing that makes round 3 difficult, of course, is the fact that many acceptance letters have already been doled out. So you have fewer slots that you are trying to compete for. So, a higher GMAT or a higher GPA may be required to help you get over the hump. So if you have really strong stats as well as a strong career, those are situations where you are well suited for round 3, especially if you're someone who can communicate why you can't wait another year to apply, because you're really trying to get in this fall based on a particular timeline that's important to you. So if you can communicate that, your stats are great, and you can stand out, that's helpful. And what minorities and industries would I say are less represented? So women tend to make up only about 30% of your top business schools. So that is one group. African Americans are underrepresented. Hispanic Americans, we find, are underrepresented. Native Americans are practically not represented at all. If you're an international student, there are certain groups that may be considered overrepresented, like Indian students or Asian students. But if you are maybe of African descent, regardless of what country you're coming from, that would still be considered underrepresented. When I was at SOM, there were literally only 6 Black people in my class, including me. And that includes Africans, not just African Americans. So schools have put more of a focus on that since then, but they're still trying to get those numbers up. And where do you get the report on MBA schools in your website? So if you go to veritasprep.com, there's an annual report section, and that includes reports for most of your top 15 schools or so. So again, you look for the annual reports on veritasprep.com. GMAT Club asks, there's an increasing number of business schools that are getting STEM accreditations. How do you look at this development and what implications it will have on MBA students? So a lot of what we see with MBA applicants, even before STEM accreditation was a thing, was we saw a lot of people coming from tech and coming from IT and coming from different STEM type opportunities, who were looking for ways to not just execute what senior management was developing. They were also looking for ways to move up and be a decision maker on that. And so I think that's only going to grow with business schools getting STEM accreditation, is them trying to marry tech with strategy, so that the tech is really being utilized in a way to help grow industry. So I hope that answers your question. Balaji asks, any suggestions on how to identify schools focused on specific areas of specialization, for example, sustainability, circular economy, and things of that nature? So this is going to sound maybe a little bit silly or obvious, but they do have those. And if you go on just on Google and search for top business schools for X, then you'll be able to find at least a cursory list of what different sites and what some of the different ranking organizations like Business Week consider the strongest for certain categories. U.S. News and World Report also does rankings based on different specializations. So that's another great site. The annual reports that GMAT Club was very nice to provide a link for just now, the essential guides. That's another place where you can find information like that. Message boards like on GMAT Club, they provide information on the specializations. And so that gives you at least a place to start in terms of what schools you should be researching for these different areas. So I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to give a follow-up. GMAT Club asks, GMAT or GRE, which one is better from an admissions perspective? There is no better or worse. They're both accepted with no prejudice against the other. GRE is still relatively new. One way to determine which is better for you kind of depends on uh, your test taking abilities, because the GRE has slightly different focuses than GMAT, slightly different style. And so there are some people who may not perform as well on a GMAT, but will do stellar on the GRE or vice versa. So that's one way to determine which is best. So I hope that answers your question. And I see GMAT Club is asking if there are any last questions from the group. Is there anything else left that we did not touch on that you need some help on? I am happy to answer any other questions that you might have. Well, if there are no other questions, then again, I just remind you, please hit like or subscribe. Um, Thank you for joining us for the 5 things you need in order to get into your top choice. Again, my name is Joe Farr with Veritas Prep. Thank you for your time. And if there's any follow-up, please feel free to put them in comments after, and we can answer. Maybe I'll look through that a little bit later, see if there's anything that didn't get covered during the course of the live portion, and answer anything then. So again, thank you. Oh, Balaji just answered a question. What are the most important questions that need to be answered for an older applicant? I think the main thing would be why you didn't apply before. That will be the obvious question that they ask. And there's not necessarily a wrong question to that. They're really just trying to tell what your thought process was and how your planning was. Is this something that you maybe could have approached earlier and didn't take the time to do it? Or is this the right time within your particular progression? And I hope that answers. And you are very welcome, sir. Glad I could help. And all right, so GMAT Club is reminding us to get in touch with MBA experts to assess our chances for acceptance. Provided a link. GMAT Club is happy to offer 7-day access to the GMAT Club tests for our YouTube subscribers. So again, please hit like or subscribe. Instructions are at the link. So thank you again for joining us for the 5 things you need in order to business school.